don't know if he's wrong about it. I'm not a doctor, but he's wrong about what the FDA said. Now, maybe the FDA is wrong, and he has done his own studies, and he understands it. But the level of misinformation that these people have when they show up there. You notice that the CNN reporter was wearing a double mask. He had an N95 underneath his, like, black face covering mask because I think he was, like, a little bit nervous. I don't blame him. I'd be a little concerned, too, going in there. All right. We will get to David Road in just...
There is at least one roller coaster designed specifically to kill you. It was never built. It was never even in consideration for construction. But that doesn't mean it isn't fascinating. Blueprinted by Julijonas Urbanas, the Euthanasia coaster is one massive climb, followed by a series of increasingly tight loops. The ride, once the top of the hill is reached, lasts about 1 minute, during which time the rider experiences 10 Gs, loses consciousness, and ultimately dies due to a sustained lack of oxygen to the brain. Urbanas does not consider his coaster a cruelty or a machine designed for executions. Instead, the 1,600-foot-tall monolith is envisioned as a more meaningful encounter with death than traditional medical euthanasia methods.
The procedures of terminating a patient's life are highly hospitalized and not much different from the mundane injection of medicine. There's no special ritual, nor is death given any special meaning apart from the legal procedures and psychological preparation. It is as if death is divorced from our cultural life, just as death rituals are in our secular and postmodern Western society. But if it is already legal, why not make it more meaningful, as a ritual adapted to the contemporary world?
Urbanas repeatedly describes his design as euphoric, the thin strands of the track as beautiful, and the experience of death as both intentional and dignified compared to our current methods. He also acknowledges its potential as both horror and black comedy. There's even a short film based on the idea with interesting, if not quite as profound results. But judging on the number of times the coaster has been featured on the front page of Reddit, how many articles and think pieces have been written about it, there's an energy here that truly captures the imagination. I think it's the physicality, not as detached as an injection, not as fast as a firing squad, not as invisible as an electric chair. The ride is eminently conceivable while simultaneously leading to something beyond our comprehension. And it is also absent of context, simply a beautiful design. There is actually another roller coaster designed to kill you, although it lacks some of Urbanas's elegance. It was made by an anonymous forum user in the game Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, and it's called Mr. Bones' Wild Ride. While the Euthanasia coaster is a minute of oxygen-depriving force, Mr. Bones' Wild Ride is, by contrast, lethally slow. It's a 31,000-foot track that riders practically crawl through, confined to their cars while 4 in-game years pass. At the end, since the game's simulated guests don't experience starvation or decomposition, they're fittingly dumped right back in line for the ride. As well known as Urbanas's design is, he might be beat by this track's lasting legacy, not the design itself, but the only thought present in its riders' minds. I want to get off Mr. Bones' Wild Ride. I, too, have created lethal virtual roller coasters, though it was rarely intentional. Instead, my crushing G-forces and my cars that left their rails behind were due to my complete non-understanding of physics, rather than my poetic utilization of it. But I still found myself weirdly transfixed by this game, Roller Coaster Tycoon. True story. Once the mayor of my city came to visit our elementary school class and ask everyone what they wanted to be when they grew up. I proudly answered, a theme park designer, although I'm not sure I had even been to one at that point. My obsession, as I mentioned with the Urbanos coaster, comes back to physicality. Theme park rides, especially roller coasters, have this interesting distinction of being some of the most visible engineering many of us ever see. You might see a building scaffold go up, but it's quickly replaced by smooth facades, glass and brick and metal. But a coaster is nothing but scaffolding. It is absolutely raw in its design, as if challenging you to confront the fact that it's as much a piece of machinery as it is a, luxury entertainment mechanism. Rarely are we met with the realities of what steel can do, more than when staring up at one of these twisting, corkscrewing colossuses. And don't even get me started on wooden coasters, so absolutely packed with struts and supports that it seems like your ride through it is almost an afterthought. A quick side story. When I was a kid, back when I was declaring my intentions to be a theme park designer, I had never really been on a roller coaster. Not a big deal, I thought. I know I like them. My first chance to test this theory was the Thunderhead coaster at Dollywood, a real park themed around legendary country singer Dolly Parton.
Get away to Dollywood, it's home in the heart of the Smokies.
Yep, the South is just weird, y'all. I began to regret my decision before we could even see the cars. Just the line snaking under what felt like hundreds of tons of wooden boards, all being shaken by the ride above, was enough to seriously spook me. If my dad wasn't with me and gently pressuring me to stay, there's absolutely no way I would have climbed into that seat. We had to get the picture, though. It was just too good. Despite the fact that Roller Coaster Tycoon is graphically primitive compared to what we're capable of now, it absolutely sells that level of design. Part of it comes from how visually dense the coasters themselves are. Put a carousel or a pirate ship somewhere, and it's a fun novelty landmark. Put a coaster down, and it dominates the landscape. It will block off sight lines. It will deform the ground. Some of the high-tech steel designs may leave light between their supports. A wooden coaster might as well be a brick wall. They're also just freaking huge. They are catastrophically big. They are not something you can just squeeze into a corner. Dropping one basically means a change to the layout of an entire park. This is one way in which Roller Coaster Tycoon feels far more realistic than something like SimCity. In a city builder, I can basically drop a skyscraper wherever I want. In Tycoon, every square foot matters. One of my favorite demonstrations of this is a scenario in which you literally have unlimited money, but the terrain is so extreme and the existing park so tight that all the money in the world doesn't help if you don't have an understanding of how to manage the rolls and curves of your coaster around the land. And guess what? I don't. I have played enough of this game to know that I absolutely do not have that understanding. I don't have the elegance. I don't have the chops. My go-to move when building a coaster was always to go as high as possible, do a giant drop, a few spins, and then desperately try to connect it back to the start. What this taught me was two things. A, even trying to accomplish a task as simple as a closed circuit track was way harder than it looks. There are certain ways tracks just can't bend. You need to accommodate the realities of the material you're working with and the cars that will ride on top of it. And B, you need to accommodate the realities of the materials riding inside the cars. That is, the people. I can't tell you how many times I pulled and prodded a track into a shape that was finally complete, only to test it and have the results tell me that it somehow has an intensity of 15 with an excitement of 1? How is that even possible? It's 7 Gs? Move over, Urbanos. I've got my own death coaster right here. Also, as a reminder, this was the kid who wanted to design theme parks. This one. That difficulty only increased my respect for the genuine article, though. Only made it seem more impossible that these rides run as safely and smoothly as they do. They don't, for the most part, have secret tricks. They stand there, confrontational, everything out in the open. It's like they're saying, what? You think something's gonna surprise you? It's all right here. It's a horror movie, except I'm telling you exactly where all the scares will be, and you're still afraid? Yes. And there is, not so coincidentally, a parallel to the actual construction of Roller Coaster Tycoon here. Chris Sawyer, the father of the series, did his homework. He visited dozens of parks, he rode the rides, all of that. But he also did more than that. He built the game itself like a roller coaster. In a lot of video game writing, a game being like a roller coaster typically means exciting, bombastic, linear. I don't mean that here. I mean, in its bones, Roller Coaster Tycoon is an exposed framework of code, as imposing and confrontational as the rides themselves. Because Roller Coaster Tycoon is written in assembly. There's an interview on PC Games N with Chris Sawyer called Roller Coaster Tycoon, the best optimized game of all time? This is a weird headline. We don't usually sell games on optimization. It's not really what drives the clicks. But in this case, I totally get it. Assembly, the coding language I referred to earlier, is not a game engine. It's not even as user-friendly as something like Java. It's closer to the literal language computers think in. Think of it this way. When you design a game in Unity, that engine is giving tools to developers to make it easier to work with. Those tools make it easier to create everything we expect a game to have. But then, when running that game, there's a process of reverse translation. Unity has to tell the computer what those tools mean, and computers don't think like we do. So, we make engines to present things to us in terms we understand. We abstract the ones and zeros into something more palatable. A good chunk of a computer's processing power is figuring out how to undo that abstraction. So, to write an entire game in assembly means that there's almost no work the computer needs to do to unabstract the thing. It's all right there, right in the open. And that means that Roller Coaster Tycoon would have been an absolute monster to program. But it also means that it could probably run on your graphing calculator. Do you see what I'm saying here? Sawyer somehow took the sparseness of a coaster's design, the form is function aesthetic, and used that same principle to make a game about roller coasters. There is no abstraction to bog us down here, nothing to slow the experience, just pure, undiluted engineering. It kicks ass. Urbanos describes his euthanasia coaster as it exists now as polyreal, not confined to just one plane of existence. The coaster itself is not an ethical, legal, moral statement. It exists in theory. It would function if one was ever built. It's us that impart the meaning onto it.
Euthanasia Coaster as a social fiction design is an incomplete story, as it is actually a functional design proposal for a killer coaster, just an engineered falling trajectory. Thus, such design is capable of existing in several realities at once that are neither here nor